Hello everyone and welcome back to Beatly Tone's Beatles channel. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining me for this video and I hope you're all doing well. Now I know that it won't have escaped your notice that next Wednesday, the 22nd of March 2023 is an important anniversary. It is the 60th anniversary of the UK release of the Please Please Me album. So in today's video I'm kind of going to try and kill two birds with one stone. Firstly by celebrating or marking the anniversary of that milestone album, and secondly by doing a deep dive review into the album. Now if you've been following the channel for a while you'll know that we've got this series going at the moment where we're doing deep dive reviews into all the Beatles albums and all the Beatles solo albums and stacking them up against each other. So we've got a scoring system where we talk about the every track on the album, give every track a score out of 10, add all the scores up at the end and then divide it by the number of tracks on the album to get an average score for the album. When we've done that, we'll then plonk it into Beatly Tone's great big album review ranking table, which looks a little bit like this. Well, it doesn't look a little bit like this, it looks exactly like this because that is actually it. And the reason why we're doing that is I thought it'd be a good idea to stack all the Beatles albums against all the solo albums to get one great big table to see where everything falls into place. Now as you saw from that little graphic that we haven't got very far with this as yet. This is episode 9 in that series, so at the end of the video we'll see where Please Please Me stacks up against the albums that we've reviewed so far. There's one little caveat to the scoring system that applies to this album, and that is in the case of songs which are covers, we're only scoring those out of 7 because I think that when you are making an album, the songwriting of a song is part of that making an album process, and of course when you're doing cover versions that is missing, so I think it's only fair and equal to mark cover versions out of 7. Okay, with that said, with no more rambling, I think we should get on with it. Although we've had lots of upgrades to the Please Please Me album with remasters and mono masters and all the various CDs that have come out, I always like to show in these deep dive reviews the record that I first heard the album that I'm reviewing on, and because you always remember your first time, right? And in my case it was this one, which is a 1970s UK stereo pressing. I would have got this in 1976, bit of ring wear there, Tony Barrow's notes and the track listing, and as I'm sure you all know, the original material on here is all credited to McCartney Lennon rather than Lennon McCartney. And I did see something quite interesting when I revisited the sleeve notes from Tony Barrow, where he says Lennon and McCartney have already tucked away enough self-penned numbers to maintain a steady output of all original singles from now until 1975. A little bit of an exaggeration and doesn't really explain why there are 6 cover versions on this album, but that's the selling game for you, I suppose. So I would have picked this up in about 1976. It came on this sort of white inner bag. And the UK stereo pressing in the 70s looked like this, with the 2-box Parlophone EMI label. And this is an incredibly clean copy. There's hardly any surface noise on this at all. It's in really good shape, which is surprising, really, when I consider the sort of the poor sort of music centre type equipment that I was playing this on in my bedroom in the 70s. Now, like I say, I would have picked this up in 1976, and to be honest, it probably would have been one of the last Beatles albums that I picked up, because when I first got into the band, my leanings were towards the late period Beatles, so the early Beatles kind of got pushed back until the end. Now, I don't know if this was the last album that I picked up to complete my collection, but it probably would have been one of the last at least. I think when you're considering the merits of Please Please Me, you kind of have to put it back into the context of 1963 to sort of really appreciate what was achieved with this album, because, you know, back in 1963, pop music was a fairly new thing. It hadn't been around that long, and I think that sort of, you know, most commentators or people sort of outside the music industry considered pop music to be a bit of a passing phase, something that would disappear just as quickly as it had arrived, something maybe to be cashed in on while people were kind of moderately interested in it. You know, it wasn't considered to be a serious art form. It was kind of tabloid fodder. None of the serious national broadsheet newspapers would write stories about pop music at that particular stage. Something else you have to take into consideration, I think, is their ages. I mean, John and Ringo were 22, Paul was 21, George was only 19, or just a few days short of his 20th birthday when they recorded the bulk of this album. And if you put that into context of today's sort of young pop stars who can barely write their own name, here we had a group who were writing their own songs, being allowed to play their own instruments on their own records, and being allowed to sing on their own records as well. And previous to that, with pop groups or artists, they would do one or two of those three things, but not all three, and that kind of made the Beatles the first self-contained pop group, if you like. Now, obviously, when the album came out in 1963, it was hugely successful. It spent 62 weeks in the top 10, which was a record for a debut album. 30 of those weeks it was number one. And those 62 weeks as a consecutive run on the top 10 of the UK charts was a record that stood for 50 years until 2013, when Emily Sandé's debut album, Our Version of Events, clocked up 66 consecutive weeks on the top 10. I think we kind of all know the story of Please Please Me. Obviously, they'd had the two singles out, Love Me Do, back with P.S. I Love You, and Please Please Me, back with Ask Me Why. And George Martin, wanting to cash in on the success of Please Please Me, asked the band, you know, what songs can you record really quickly so we can put out an album? And they suggested their live set, which they knew inside out and back to front. A lot of the songs they've been playing for a long, long time. So the original idea for the Beatles' debut album was it was going to be a live album, and it was going to be recorded at the Cavern in Liverpool, which incidentally is where I'm going to be on Saturday night. But more of that later. But when George Martin went to the Cavern to sort of suss it out and find out how they might do that, how they might set up for a live recording, he decided that the acoustics at the Cavern weren't going to be good enough for recording an album, and they probably wouldn't have got all the huge amounts of recording equipment down the steps anyway, so they kind of reverted to doing it at EMI Studios at Abbey Road. Now, the Beatles at that time were on their first UK tour. They were supporting Helen Shapiro, and they managed to wangle a day off. They went down to London and recorded the album at Abbey Road. Quite famously, 10 songs recorded within 10 hours, and that doesn't even include a few attempts at doing Hold Me Tight, which was deemed not good enough for this album. It ended up on With the Beatles, and quite frankly, it probably wasn't good enough for that album either. Incidentally, Rolling Stone magazine in 2012 named Please Please Me the 39th best album of all time, which of course is a huge exaggeration, but when did Rolling Stone magazine ever get any of their charts right? Okay, let's get on with the song. So obviously the album kicks off with I Saw Her Standing There, a fabulous song, which starts with that 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's the 4 bit of that kind of really gives the grit to that counting, that kind of introduces you to the energy that is about to happen, the raw energy that is about to happen. A great song, terrific bass line from Paul, which he quite freely admits that he nicked from Chuck Berry's song I'm Talking About You. And if you've got the On Air Live at the BBC Volume 2, that track is on there with the Beatles playing it, and if you ever listen to it, you'll hear that bass line is pretty much identical on that song. Now, also on Please Please Me, we get introduced to a couple of things that became sort of Beatles trademarks of their early songs. For a start, we have the first introduction of the ooh. We also get the first introduction of the sort of scream before the guitar solo, and we also get for the first time that sort of at the end of the song, that sort of one beat gap and then the single chord to end the song, which also they did on quite a few of their songs in the early days. Great song, I Saw Her Standing There. It maybe has become a little bit tired over the years, probably mainly because of Paul playing it virtually on every tour since 1989, but it's still a great song, and I'm giving it 8 out of 10. So track 2 on the album is the second self-penned song, Misery, a song full of self-pity, as the title would insinuate. Now, I would say that this song was probably equally co-written by John and Paul, but it's John's voice that you hear on the lead vocal on this song. His voice is double-tracked, and Paul adding some really lovely harmonies behind that lead vocal of John's. Now, the song's got a great middle eight, the I Remember All the Little Things We've Done bit, with that little piano flourish, that dun 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 dun. That's George Martin playing that, and that piano part wasn't recorded on the February 11th session. He went in and did that as an overdub a week later. Now, John notoriously went into the studio on February 11th with quite a heavy cold, and you can kind of really hear it in his voice on this the song. But it's a good song. I like this song quite a lot, and I'm going to give it 7 out of 10. Now, following on from Misery, we then get 3 cover versions on The Bounce. Now, what happened when they started the evening session on February the 11th? They wasted the first hour with various takes of Hold Me Tight, which resulted in nothing good enough to use on the album. So time was pressing. They needed to get a bit of a wriggle on, so they turned to songs from their live set, cover versions from their live set that they knew they could record really quickly. Now, the first of those is Anna, Go to Him, a song by Arthur Alexander. Now, John was a big fan of Arthur Alexander. Not as big a fan of Arthur Alexander as he was of Brandy Alexander's, but that's another story. But he was a big fan. They also covered a Shot of Rhythm and Blues in their live set, and you can also find that on the Live at the BBC album. Now, the song it labours a little bit. It's a little bit slow in paces, and where it is slow, John's voice is a little bit shaky, but when it gets to the middle 8, which is actually a middle 16, that all of my life I've been searching bit, he's allowed to let rip, and some of the kind of the momentum of the song is back. But it's not a great song, and I'm going to give it 5 out of 7. Next up is the song Chains, a Goffin and King song. This was given to George to sing, with Paul and John providing backing vocals. But again, George is vocal is a little bit weedy on this song, and again, it's not a great song. This was part of their live set around this time, but it didn't stay in the set very long, and you kind of understand why. So I'm going to give that 5 out of 7 as well. But then by the time we get to track 5, which is Boys, the whole momentum of the album is raised again. The energy is back in the album because Boys, fantastic song. Ringo delivers a brilliant vocal on this. Now, it's quite ironic because Boys was kind of the Beatles drummer song because before Ringo joined the band, Pete Best used to do the lead vocals on Boys, and it's a bit of an odd song for a bloke to be singing because it was a hit for the Shirelles, so an all-girl group. A bit unusual to be singing about boys, I guess, in 1963. But Ringo, as I say, he does a fantastic job with the vocal. Some brilliant drumming from him as well. Some really great bass playing by Paul on that song. And of course, the backing vocals by John Paul and George, the Bop Shoo-Wop bits. Fantastic. There's screams and whoops in the background. Everyone's having a great time. And the energy is back in the album. So I'm going to give Boys 6 out of 7. So next track up is Ask Me Why. Now this had obviously already been out as the B-side of the Please Please Me single, and that's pretty much where this song is. It's a B-side, nothing more, nothing less. It's quite interesting musically with all its stops and its starts, and it's kind of reminiscent or is written in the style of maybe an early Smokey Robinson and the Miracles song, What's So Great About Goodbyes. That's where the I and the you, ooh, ooh, ooh come from in that song. But lyrically, I think this song is quite naive. I mean, it was written by a very young John Lennon, and you know, it would only be a matter of months when he would be writing much better lyrics than this. So I think that musically it's great, lyrically it's poor. I'm going to give it 5 out of 10. So we've arrived at the final track on side 1, and it is the title track, the utterly brilliant Please Please Me. Now, I think that we all know the story of Please Please Me. George Martin wanted the Beatles to record Mitch Mitchell's How Do You Do It as their follow-up single to Love Me Do. The Beatles absolutely hated it, came up with their own song, Please Please Me, a much slower version, more of a kind of a Roy Orbison pastiche. George Martin suggested that they sped it up, which was absolutely key into making this a hit single. We're never really sure whether it got to number 1 or number 2 because we didn't have a unified singles chart in the UK in 1963, but most of the music papers had it as number 1. There was a couple of outlets that had it as number 2, so it never really got an official number 1 billing, but to all intents and purposes, it is a number 1 single. And of course, Jerry and the Pacemakers went on to have a number 1 single with How Do You Do It. Now, the song itself is just brilliant. That harmonica riff, fantastic. Ringo's drum work on it is brilliant. The tom-tom work that he does, that fantastic mid-late, the come on bit, really sort of makes the song. It's brilliantly sung by John, ably abetted by Paul and George. A fantastic song, a song that I've never really got bored of. Now, there's a brilliant story attached to this song. The Beatles engineer Norman Smith, he sent an acetate of the final song to Dick Rowe, the Decca bloke, hoping to trick him into turning the Beatles down for a second time, but he didn't fall for it the second time. But it's a great story anyway. So that's Please Please Me. For me, the best track on the album, and I'm giving it 9 out of 10. Side 2 opens with the already released single Love Me Do It, got to number 17 in the charts. Mainly due to sales in the Liverpool area. We know that Brian Epstein bought thousands of copies to sell in his Nîmes shop, which gave it that little nudge into the charts. But it's a song that I never really liked that much as a kid, but I've grown to like a lot more as an adult, as I got older, kind of appreciate it a little bit more, the sort of the vocal interplay between John and Paul on the song, and the kind of the rasping harmonica that runs throughout the song. Now, obviously, famously, Ringo didn't play drums on this version of the song. That was played by Andy White, session drummer, and always kind of miffed Ringo that he didn't play on the album version of this. But if you actually listen to it, all you really hear from Andy White is his kick drum and the cymbal at the end of the break. The rest of the rhythm is really provided by Ringo's tambourine, which is mixed really high in the mix, so Ringo shouldn't be too miffed about that, but I kind of get where he's coming from. But it is a song that I like a lot more as an adult. As a kid, I always used to think Love Me Do was an odd expression, a sort of an expression that you would never actually hear anyone say in real life, and that kind of put me off it, but now I don't care so much. So I'm quite confident to give this one 6 out of 10. Track 2 on side 2 is its B-side, P.S. I Love You, and unlike Ask Me Why, this song is a little bit more than a B-side. This is a decent album cut, I think. It's got lots of variations, vocal variations throughout it, which I like very much, and it's kind of a song in the style of a letter, which was kind of a bit of a thing in the late 50s and early 60s, and this is the Beatles having a go at doing a letter type song. So again, I'm going to give P.S. I Love You, which I think is a decent track, 6 out of 10. I probably should have mentioned that Andy White also features on drums on P.S. I Love You, with Ringo being relegated to maracas. Okay, on to side 2, track 3, Baby It's You, a cover of the Hal David and Burt Bacharach song, made famous by the Shirelles again, the second Shirelles song to be covered on this album. And I'm pretty sure that when the Beatles exploded later in 1963, the fact that the Shirelles had 2 of their songs on this album probably did wonders for the sale of Shirelles records. But Beatles do a really good job with this song, and particularly the vocal provided by John, which offers sort of light and shade at both ends of the vocal scale. He does a really good job on that, ably abetted by Paul and George on backing vocals, doing the cheat and the sha-la-la-la bits, which are great as well. There's an overdub on this song in the middle where George plays his guitar solo. George Martin overdubs the keyboard, Celesta keyboard, over the top of it, playing exactly the same notes as George plays in his solo. So it's kind of double tracking it on that instrument. And that song, that overdub was done not at the February the 11th session, but a week later when he did the overdubs to Misery as well. Now, as a little aside to Baby It's You, there's another great version that I've heard of this song, which is the version by Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe. If you want to check it out, you can find it on the bonus CD of Elvis Costello's Goodbye Cruel World album. But don't buy the album just for that song, because it's probably Elvis Costello's worst album. But they do a really great version of Baby It's You. Baby It's You, a song that I really like a lot, and I'm going to give that 6.5 out of 7. Okay, moving on to track 4, which is Do You Want to Know a Secret, sung by George. This song, fairly pedestrian for me. George does a reasonable job with the vocals on this, but it doesn't really go anywhere for me. A little bit of filler, a song that they felt confident enough to give away to Billy J. Kramer, who had a #1 hit with it. But Do You Want to Know a Secret, for me, one of the weaker Lennon-McCartney or McCartney-Lennon songs on the album. So I'm giving that 5.5 out of 10. So track 4 is another cover, Taste of Honey. This is a song that I've never really taken to. It is my least favourite song on the album. It's just a little bit too music hall for me. So I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm going to give it 3 out of 7. Now, the penultimate track, There's a Place, is the last Lennon-McCartney song on the album, but it was the first song that they recorded as part of the February the 11th sessions, and it really benefits from being that first song because it's got that freshness, it's got that energy. Really fantastic song. It's one of John's sort of introverted, inward looking lyrics. Fantastic lyric. There's a place where I can go, where I feel low, where I feel blue, and it's my mind, and there's no time when I'm alone. One of these sort of inwardly looking lyrics that John tended to write throughout the Beatles' career, you know, moving on to, I'm a loser, to Help, and probably ending somewhere around Your Blues, one of those sort of songs. Now, John is the lead singer on this, but there is enough harmonising from Paul to almost give him equal billing as lead singer on this song, and backing vocals by George. A really, really great song that I like a lot. I'm going to give this one 7.5 out of 10. Okay, we've arrived at the final song, cover version, Twist and Shout. A brilliant way to end the album. It was the last song that they recorded on that February 11th session. They knocked it out in one take. John's vocals absolutely in shreds by the end of this mammoth 10-hour session, but they absolutely rip the original to pieces on this version. If there was the epitome of taking a cover song and making it your own, then the Beatles doing Twist and Shout is it. A lot of people think of Twist and Shout as being a Beatles song, and that is kind of the epitome of making it your own. A brilliant performance throughout, a brilliant way to end the album, a song that sort of stayed in their live set right up to 1965. I'm going to give Twist and Shout the maximum for a cover, 7 out of 7. So I think when you consider the Please Please Me album as a whole, it's a more than decent debut album with 4 or 5 really top quality moments on it. Not really too much of a hint of the magnificence that was to follow from this band, but it wouldn't be that long before they were writing songs of the highest quality. Now, when I add up all the scores that I've given the tracks on this album, I come to 86.5. There are 14 tracks on the album, which gives it an average score of 6.18. So we're going to plonk it into Beatly Tone's great big album review ranking table, and we can see that it's coming in currently at number 8, just above Ringo Starr's I Wanna Be Santa Claus, which is not really very surprising, but just below McCartney 3, which will be surprising to some. But obviously we've only done these deep dive reviews on 9 albums so far, so there's a lot more of these deep dive reviews to come on the channel, and we will build this table out into something quite magnificent. And please tell me down in the comments what you think of the Please Please Me album, your favourite songs, your least favourite songs, that sort of caper. As you know, I read all your comments and I will respond to all your comments. But you might have to wait a little while for my response, because I don't know if I've mentioned it already, but I'm going to Liverpool this weekend. I'm going to be in the Cavern on Saturday night watching a band, and I'm going to do all the touristy things. So hoping to bring you a video from around Liverpool next week if I can get some decent footage. We're going to be doing all the sites, the Magical Mystery Tour and all that sort of caper. So that's to come on the channel next week. I hope you've enjoyed this video. As I say, please do tell me what you think of Please Please Me down in the comments. And thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.